I am a very old woman, and this is something that happened a little over 75 years ago when I was 16 years old. It was just my mother and me. My father died in the war. Our neighbors knew this, but they still gave my mother odd looks at the butchers or at the church because of just how taboo single motherhood was back then. They seemed to silently judge her, as if she had chosen to be single instead of fate having determined this for her. And when I crept toward marrying age, back then, in my town at least, that could be as young as 17. They slid their judging eyes toward me because I didn't have any suitors lining up to court me. Given that type of environment, it's no surprise what they did to one of my neighbors, Billy, when he decided to celebrate Halloween on Christmas. Billy was a shy, bookish boy. He was tall and gangly, with long hair that covered his eyes. He had an upturned nose, rosy cheeks, and prominent front teeth. He was about my age, and he was probably the only boy in town my mother and the neighbors didn't want to become my future husband. This was ironic because he was the only boy I ever found even the slightest bit interesting, though I can't say I ever saw him in any sort of romantic light. Even as someone who doesn't generally judge people, I'm good friends with a gay fellow who lives in the room next door, for example. I found Billy to be a bit too odd to get close to. That doesn't mean I didn't feel for him. Billy was from a big city. His parents were killed on Christmas Day. It was the evening and they were standing at the corner of a busy street, waiting on a bus to get home after a night out. A drunk driver jumped a curb and struck both of them dead. Luckily, Billy, who was around 8 years old at the time, wasn't with them. He was at home with the maid. I remember people whispering about this when he first moved to our neighborhood. It turned out that the reclusive elderly lady from down the street was his aunt, and he'd come to live with her. Mostly, we'd kept out of the way of Billy and his aunt, whom we saw leave the house less and less often as the years ticked by. But then, on December 1st, when the Christmas season was just beginning. Yes, we didn't begin in November back then. Imagine that. Billy did something so intolerably strange. It threw the whole neighborhood into a tizzy. It started with the placement of a simple jack-o'-lantern on Billy's porch. When I say simple, I mean it. Back then, there were no designs you could look up and print out from the web. No elaborate carving kits. It was just the pumpkin and the steak knife you had to work with, you see. And Billy had carved a smiling happy face onto a pumpkin, with a stereotypical scraggly grin and triangular eyes and nose. The only problem was that he had done this at an entirely wrong time. As you can imagine, it didn't escape people's notice. At first, they were perplexed. The initial reaction was that Billy had simply neglected to throw out his jack-o'-lantern from a few months ago. But the pumpkin was new and fresh. To this day, I can't imagine where he got it from. It showed no signs of decay, no mold, no nothing. It was orange and plump and good enough to make into a pie. I can't remember exactly, but once it became apparent that Billy, and possibly also his aunt, were having a late Halloween, the murmurings turned from reasonable calls of, "He should throw that old pumpkin out," to half-amused, half-suspicious remarks about how someone must really like Halloween. But then it got worse. I remember running into Billy at the candy shop while I was perusing candy canes. He was standing before the clerk holding a bag of candy corn. The clerk looked awfully hesitant to check him out, I remember thinking this was amusing considering candy corn was sold at the shop year-round. I had a feeling the clerk would have ordinarily checked out someone who wanted candy corn out of season without any problems. At most, he probably would have given them an amused smile or even laughed at them. But from the rather fearful look on his face, it was evident he had heard about Billy's strange observance of a December Halloween. And why wouldn't he have heard? Word got around fast because our town was very small. Just as the clerk was acquiescing and reaching for Billy's cash, someone stepped forward and brashly demanded of Billy, "Why is it you're having Halloween when it's Christmas time?" Nonplussed, Billy calmly replied, "Halloween is my favorite holiday. I missed Halloween this year, so I thought, hey, better late than never." I remember he chuckled, but the man who'd accosted him didn't think this was funny. "But why?" demanded a stern-faced woman who was holding back her young child. "Did you miss Halloween? How is that even possible? What happened?" Many others joined in, berating Billy, demanding he answer. But he refused. He paid for the candy corn and stormed out of the store, red-faced and watery-eyed. I remember thinking it was none of their business what caused Billy to miss Halloween. I figured it had to have been some sort of tragedy, given how he reacted when people insisted he tell them. As Christmas grew nearer, no one was merely amused or curious any longer. And if anyone wasn't angry about it, or at least suspicious of Billy's December Halloween, now they most certainly were. Most people were outright furious. I remember one morning I saw Billy's house decorated in an impressive array of bedsheet ghosts, posable paper skeletons with riveted joints, stretch cotton spiderwebs and the like, and more smiling jack-o'-lanterns kept popping up on the porch. It didn't last long. A woman complained to Billy that the decorations were unsettling her child, corrupting the child even. She threatened to call the authorities, which made Billy extremely nervous, I vividly recall. But he pointed out there was no law against what he was doing, and she had no choice but to begrudgingly concede. I think a few people might have actually called the cops, but were told there was nothing they could do. That's someone's home decor. If it's not bothering anyone else, wasn't law enforcement's concern. It was then that people started taking matters into their own hands. It started when someone got bold enough to swipe a jack-o'-lantern off Billy's porch. Then, in short order, people began ripping down the ghosts, skeletons, and cobwebs, which they drove to the dump personally. I kept a close eye on this. One afternoon, I swear I heard a man grumbling about how disposing of Billy's Halloween things was interfering with his plans to attend a family gathering. The facade of Billy's house remained bare for a period of 3, maybe 4 days. It was the week before Christmas. The neighborhood settled. It seemed they had successfully fought back. A group of Christmas carolers arrived at Billy's door. Yes, we actually used to do that back then, and quite regularly. I remember laughing when I saw Billy emerge with a bag, mischievous grin on his face. A grin as big as a jack-o'-lantern's, I might even say, and threw the candy at the singers. They were terribly confused and a bit affronted. And that was the beginning of Billy's revenge. We started waking up to see our Christmas lights covered in cotton spiderwebs, as if Billy had crept out at night to do the deed. It would have been easy to get away with such a prank, I guess you would call it back then. No doorbell cameras, of course, hardly any home security whatsoever. But no one needed a camera to know who'd spread those webs over our lights. Several people marched up to Billy's house to confront him. but they were appalled and a little afraid of what they'd found. The decorations were all back, and they'd returned with a vengeance. There were enough pumpkins on that rusty, rickety old porch to fill a pumpkin patch, and all of them with faces carved into them, and not a single one of them were smiling. There were 2 paper skeletons taped to the door, arranged in such a manner that it looked like they were committing, well, a scandalous sort of act, we'll say. I'll leave it to your imagination. Suffice it to say, it was something that would cause outrage even today, much less back then. There was only one bedsheet ghost this time, nailed to the highest gable so that it would appear Billy had climbed onto the roof to get it up there. And anyone who wanted to get it down would have to do likewise. It was Christmas Eve at this point, and the neighborhood arranged a meeting at the house of the neighborhood's richest resident, the pastor at my church. I was in attendance because my mother had dragged me along. Up to that point, she hadn't been bothered by Billy, but as any admittedly sensible person would do, she drew a line when Billy stepped onto our property and started vandalizing our Christmas lights. We all agreed we would confront Billy together, and if he refused to cease and desist with his Halloween nonsense, we'd demand to speak to his aunt, and if she did nothing to stop Billy, then we'd involve the police. We had reason to believe that the boy had been stalking around our yards after all. And trespassing, unlike celebrating Halloween a few months late, was definitely a crime. We all marched over to the house, the pastor leading the way. Tightly clutching a Bible, his face screwed up in righteous fury and determination. No one was going to insult the most holy day of Christmas with a pagan holiday, he declared to us. I remember thinking him calling Halloween pagan sounded wrong, but no one corrected him. We all were too ignorant. Back then, we didn't have all the information in the world at our fingertips, and not many people sought out information at a library or a museum. But hell, even now, readily available access to facts won't stop someone from believing any crazy thing they damn well mean to. Billy opened the door the minute we'd stepped at his porch, as if he'd been awaiting our arrival. I remember he looked perfectly calm, stoic even. "God will not be mocked, son," the pastor told Billy viciously through his teeth. He had his Bible in his hand and was leaning forward like he was preparing to charge into the house and perform an exorcism. Billy merely smirked in response. "This Halloween nonsense has got to stop," someone cried. "It isn't right," another agreed. "You can't just move holidays around." I'll never forget the smooth, almost cocky certainty in Billy's voice when he responded to the crowd. "Oh," he said cryptically, his eyes bulging and wild. "You won't have to worry for much longer now." "Certainly we won't," the pastor spat. "So, are you going to stop blaspheming, or do we need to have a talk with your aunt?" For a moment, Billy looked worried. I think it was at that moment I realized he was far gone. In the head, that is. If he weren't crazy, then that little flicker of primal fear in his face wouldn't have been so jarring. But in a flash, Billy's mad jack-o'-lantern grin returned, and when he didn't say anything, the crowd lost all patience. Led by the pastor, they forced their way inside. I only got a peek of Billy's aunt, but that was enough to burn the image of her in my mind. Her head was missing. We moved so quickly after this, I never found out if they ever located it. And it was replaced with a jack-o'-lantern, one with a cute little smiling face, a crescent moon for a mouth, a round little nose, and big, happy eyes. Her body was positioned awkwardly, so that she was half sitting, half lying down in the corner, with her legs crossed and her arms falling limply by her sides. She'd been dressed in a blue and white gown, her Sunday best, that was splotched here and there with blood. A rather large stain spread over her lap. Billy ran away when we were all distracted by our grisly discovery. He was never found. Rumors about the investigation swirled around our town. Apparently, they found several books in Billy's bedroom. That checked out. The library was maybe the place where I'd encountered him the most, reading silently and with intense focus at the isolated table. The rumor was that the books were occult in nature, and that Billy was enacting some sort of dark ritual. Me? I'm not sure if I believe that. That is, I don't believe Billy was researching the occult per se, but I do strongly suspect that he was researching Halloween. I did myself in the years after the incident, and I learned quite a bit. The coroner's report got to our ears in the days after Christmas, which was basically cancelled for our neighborhood that year due to most of us losing the holiday spirit. Apparently, Billy's aunt had probably been dead for weeks or months of natural causes, and Billy had, well, tampered with the corpse for a long time thereafter. My guess is she died around Halloween, and Billy didn't celebrate his favorite holiday because he was overwhelmed with grief. I personally don't think that Billy chose to celebrate Halloween at Christmas that year, all that time ago, simply because he missed the traditional October 31st date. Halloween, I've learned, is a day the ancient Gaels believe the dead walked among us. I think Billy was lonely to a point where it drove him mad. It's my guess that he was trying to resurrect his aunt. But to make that happen in his mind, Halloween celebrations needed to ensue. I think he was basically flipping the bird at Christmas, a day he likely wasn't fond of considering it was the day his parents died. Christmas preached about eternal life in only vague terms of going to heaven, something made possible because of the birth of someone who'd given himself over to a violent human sacrifice. But Billy didn't want his aunt in heaven. He wanted her with him, alive again. She was all he had left. Or maybe he was just batshit. I don't really know. Most people in the neighborhood opted to move out as soon as they were able. My mother and I were out of there by Valentine's Day, because her brother offered to shelter us after she relayed the whole story to him. I stayed with my mom and uncle until I was 19, and then I finally let myself be married because I would be out on my ass otherwise. The incident with Billy's aunt wasn't widely publicized, and I can't find any reference to it online. After no family members showed up to claim the aunt's body, I suspect the police had the story killed. Probably they were embarrassed that they'd never investigated Billy's behavior, despite some of his neighbors calling about it. Cover-ups like that were common back then. Hell, they're still pretty common now. Now that I have a foot in the grave and am regarded as senile by most of my caretakers and family, I have no scruples telling all of this to random strangers online. I've had a complicated relationship with Christmas since the incident with Billy. I've been going through the motions each year for the sake of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, putting on a happy face. But I don't really believe in Christmas's promise of life after death, or Halloween's for that matter. We all die. We all turn to dust. I've accepted that. Seeing Billy's aunt maybe put that attitude in me, that there was no actual dignity in death, nothing special or holy about it. Don't let the holidays fool you. Not to put a damper on your holiday season, Merry Christmas, and hell, why not, Happy Halloween!